Growing up, my parents always seemed to have a favorite, my older sister, Rachel. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. Rachel, 32F, was everything they wanted in a child: brilliant, charming, and endlessly successful. Meanwhile, I, 30M, was the troublesome one, the black sheep of the family. From a young age, Rachel excelled at everything she tried. She was a straight-A student, played piano, captained the debate team, and was adored by teachers and classmates alike. My parents showered her with praise, attending every recital, game, and award ceremony with pride shining in their eyes. Whenever Rachel achieved something, they'd throw elaborate parties, inviting everyone they knew to celebrate their perfect daughter. I was there, too, standing in the corner, feeling invisible. I, on the other hand, struggled to find my place. School wasn't easy for me. While Rachel breezed through her classes, I scraped by with average grades. My interests didn't lie in academics or extracurriculars that made parents brag. I was always drawn to working with my hands, building things, and finding creative solutions to practical problems. My fascination with cars began in high school. I'd spend hours tinkering with old engines, figuring out how they worked, and customizing them with unique accessories. My parents dismissed my interests as trivial hobbies, not worthy of real attention. They openly compared me to Rachel, reminding me that while she was destined for greatness, I was setting myself up for mediocrity. They'd say things like, "Why can't you be more like Rachel?" or "You need to buckle down if you want to make something of yourself." The message was clear: Rachel was the star, and I was the supporting character in our family's narrative. When Rachel graduated high school as valedictorian and got accepted into an Ivy League college, my parents were over the moon. I still remember the day they received her acceptance letter. My mom burst into tears, hugging Rachel tightly, while my dad popped open a bottle of champagne. For them, Rachel's acceptance was their crowning achievement as parents. My own high school graduation was a much quieter affair. No tears, no champagne, just a reminder to start looking for a real job. Rachel flourished in college, landing prestigious internships and making influential connections. After graduation, she secured a high-paying job at a major corporation. Within a few years, she became one of the youngest executives in the company's history. My parents couldn't have been prouder. Every conversation, every family gathering revolved around Rachel's achievements. Her corporate success became the yardstick against which I was measured and, inevitably, found wanting. During this time, I continued to explore my passion for cars. I worked at a local auto repair shop, learning everything I could about the industry. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fulfilling. I started designing custom car accessories on the side, nothing too fancy at first, just small things like personalized gear knobs or custom decals. Slowly, I began to see a market for unique, high-quality car accessories. The idea of starting my own business took root. It wasn't just a pipe dream, I saw a real opportunity to create something valuable. I spent months researching, developing prototypes, and crafting a business plan. I saved every penny I could, sacrificing nights out and vacations, investing everything into my vision. When I finally felt ready to take the plunge, I decided to tell my parents about my plans. Despite our strained relationship, I hoped they'd support my dream, or at the very least, offer some constructive feedback. I waited until the day after a big party they'd thrown to celebrate Rachel's latest promotion. I thought it was perfect timing. They were already in a good mood from celebrating Rachel, and maybe some of that goodwill would spill over to me. But when I sat them down and explained my idea, their reaction was soul-crushing. They laughed, thinking I was joking. When they realized I was serious, their laughter turned to disdain. My dad said it was embarrassing that, after all the years of education and opportunities they'd given me, this was my big plan. My mom looked at me like I'd suggested throwing my life away. They warned me not to quit my job, claiming they didn't want to introduce their son as a failure who sold trinkets for cars. They outright told me that Rachel's success was the standard, and anything less was a disgrace. It was clear they believed my business would fail, and they didn't want to be associated with it when it did. Our conversation escalated quickly, turning from dismissal to anger. My parents gave me an ultimatum: either continue working in a respectable job or pursue my foolish dream and be disowned. They told me they were tired of explaining why their son wasn't as successful as their daughter, and my business idea was the last straw. Faced with their rejection, I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to walk away. I packed my things, found a tiny apartment in a rough part of town, and cut off contact with them. Rachel, predictably, took their side. She called me selfish and ungrateful, reinforcing the idea that I was the family disappointment. We haven't spoken since. Starting the business was rough. I poured my heart and soul into it, working long hours and sacrificing any semblance of a social life. In the beginning, I was living paycheck to paycheck, scraping by with minimal sales. But I believed in my vision. I networked tirelessly, attending car shows, joining online forums, and leveraging social media to get the word out. Gradually, my hard work started to pay off. People appreciated the uniqueness of my designs and the quality of my work. Word of mouth spread, and my customer base grew. About a year and a half in, things finally took off. Orders were pouring in, and I secured a few lucrative contracts with local dealerships. I upgraded my living situation, moved into a nicer apartment, and bought a reliable car, one that showcased my custom designs. Financially, I wasn't a millionaire, but I was doing well. More importantly, I was happy. I'd built something from the ground up, and it was thriving. During this time, I also met Sophie. She was a customer who became a friend, then a confidant, and eventually, my wife. Sophie has been my rock, supporting me through the ups and downs, believing in me when no one else did. We've been married for 2 years now, and last month, we found out we're expecting our first child. It's been nearly 6 years since I last spoke to my parents. They know where I am and could have reached out at any time. But they didn't, until last week. Out of nowhere, I received a message from them, asking to meet. Sophie encouraged me to go and see what they wanted, so I did. When I arrived at their house, the welcome was shockingly warm, a stark contrast to the last conversation we had. Their friendliness felt off, almost rehearsed. After some awkward small talk, they got to the point. They said they'd heard about my business success and wanted to congratulate me. But soon, the conversation shifted to Rachel. After the initial pleasantries, the conversation shifted toward Rachel. My parents explained that her company had gone through massive layoffs recently, and Rachel had been one of the employees let go. They said she'd been struggling to find a new job and that the whole ordeal had taken a toll on her mental health. According to them, Rachel was feeling overwhelmed and wasn't in the right headspace to apply for jobs on her own. As they spoke, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort. It was strange to hear them speak about Rachel with such worry, strange, because they'd never shown that kind of concern for me when I was struggling. Still, I kept listening. I wanted to see where this was going. Eventually, they got to the point, they wanted me to hire Rachel. She has so much experience in management, my dad said. She'd be an asset to your company. She just needs a little help to get back on her feet, my mom added. And who better to help her than her own brother? The request caught me off guard. After 6 years of silence, my parents weren't reaching out to apologize or reconcile, they were reaching out because they needed something. And it wasn't even for them, it was for Rachel. I told them I'd need time to think about it. Honestly, I wasn't sure how to respond in the moment. I wasn't about to make a decision without weighing the implications, but deep down, I already knew what my answer would be. When I got home, I told Sophie about the conversation. She listened patiently as I recounted everything, from my parents' warm welcome to their request for Rachel. When I finished, she looked thoughtful for a moment before speaking. "This is your decision," she said. "I don't want to influence you. But just remember, they didn't support you when you needed them. They turned their backs on you, and now that you're successful, they're coming to you because they want something. Do you really think that's fair?" She had a point. My parents had written me off as a failure and cut me out of their lives when I decided to pursue my dreams. They hadn't been there during the hard times, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. And now, they were asking for a favor, no, demanding one, as if they were entitled to my help simply because we shared DNA. Rachel was no better. She'd sided with them, called me selfish and ungrateful, and hadn't spoken to me in years. We'd never been close, and I doubted that would change if I hired her. The idea of working together felt like a disaster waiting to happen. The more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But I also didn't want to deal with the inevitable backlash that would come from saying no. I decided to put off telling them, hoping they'd take the hint and drop the issue. Unfortunately, they didn't. Over the next few days, my parents bombarded me with texts, asking if I'd made a decision. At first, I ignored them, but the messages kept coming. Finally, they called me, demanding an answer. I've thought about it, I told them. And I don't think it's a good idea. Rachel and I have never had a good relationship, and I don't think we'd work well together. I'm sorry, but I can't offer her a position. Their response was immediate and explosive. What do you mean you can't? My mom yelled. She's your sister. She's family. You're just going to turn your back on her when she needs you the most? You owe us this, my dad added angrily. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? I was stunned. They were acting as if I owed them some kind of debt, as if raising me and providing for me were favors, not basic parental responsibilities. You disowned me, I reminded them. You told me I was an embarrassment. You laughed at my dreams and said I'd never succeed. And now that I've proven you wrong, you think you can just walk back into my life and start making demands? That's not how this works. My mom started crying, accusing me of holding a grudge and refusing to let go of the past. My dad accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, saying they'd have supported me if my business had failed. Really? I asked. Because you didn't support me when I was starting out. You didn't even believe in me. So don't act like you would have been there for me if things had gone wrong. You made it clear back then that you wanted nothing to do with me, and now I'm returning the favor. The argument went in circles for a while before I finally hung up. I blocked their numbers after that, not wanting to deal with any more of their nonsense. For the next few days, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I knew I'd made the right decision. My parents had no right to demand anything from me, especially after the way they'd treated me. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt. What if I really was being petty? What if I was letting my resentment cloud my judgment? I talked to Sophie about it again, and she reassured me that I'd done nothing wrong. They're trying to manipulate you, she said. They're only reaching out now because they want something. If they were genuinely sorry, they'd apologize for the past, not guilt-trip you into helping them. She was right, of course. My parents weren't interested in making amends, they were interested in what I could do for Rachel. And that wasn't my responsibility. Still, the guilt lingered. It wasn't until I spoke to a few of my relatives that I started to feel better. Apparently, my parents had been spreading lies about me, telling everyone that I was jealous of Rachel and was refusing to help her out of spite. When my relatives reached out to me, I explained the truth. Most of them were supportive, telling me I was under no obligation to help Rachel, especially given our history. Their validation helped, but the situation was far from over. My parents weren't giving up that easily. Even after I blocked their numbers, my parents found ways to escalate the situation. They started reaching out to extended family members, spinning a story that painted me as the villain. According to them, I was bitter, jealous of Rachel's success, and taking pleasure in watching her struggle. They made it sound like Rachel was on the verge of ruin and that I was selfishly refusing to help out of spite. Soon, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from concerned relatives. A few were genuinely confused, asking why I wouldn't help my own sister. Others sent screenshots of the messages my parents had sent, which were filled with exaggerations and outright lies. I took the time to explain my side to those who reached out, detailing everything, from how my parents had disowned me 6 years ago to their sudden reappearance now that I was successful. I told them about the ultimatum they'd given me when I started my business, the years of silence, and their complete lack of support during my struggles. I also made it clear that Rachel had never reached out to me directly and that I doubted she even wanted to work with me. To my relief, most of my relatives were supportive. Many of them already knew about the strained relationship I had with my parents and said they weren't surprised by their behavior. A few even apologized on behalf of my parents, though I assured them it wasn't their fault. But the drama didn't end there. My parents took things a step further by posting about the situation on social media. They wrote a long, emotional post about how they'd always supported both their children equally, and how devastated they were that I was refusing to help Rachel. They claimed they had only reached out to me because they believed families should stick together, and they were heartbroken that I was letting petty grudges destroy the family. If their goal was to garner sympathy, it didn't work. Most of my relatives and family friends saw through the facade and called them out in the comments. People pointed out the inconsistencies in their story, asked why they hadn't supported me when I was struggling, and reminded them that parents are supposed to treat their children fairly. Some even mentioned how they'd witnessed my parents' favoritism toward Rachel firsthand. It didn't take long for the post to backfire. My parents were flooded with criticism, and after a couple of days, they deleted the post entirely. But the damage was already done. Their attempts to rally support had only exposed their toxic behavior to everyone around them. Around this time, I started receiving updates from relatives that Rachel was upset about the situation, though not for the reasons I expected. According to them, she was angry at our parents for dragging her into their mess and making her look desperate. Apparently, she'd been ignoring their calls and texts, which was unusual for Rachel, who'd always been close to them. I wasn't sure what to make of it until I received an unexpected call from Rachel herself. At first, I ignored the call. After everything that had happened, I didn't see the point in talking to her. But then she called again, and again. She even messaged me, saying it was urgent and that she wasn't calling to ask for anything. Reluctantly, I answered. "Before you hang up," she said quickly, "I just want to say I'm sorry. I need to explain something." Her tone caught me off guard. Rachel sounded genuinely apologetic, a far cry from the confident, self-assured person I remembered. I decided to hear her out. Rachel told me that she'd been feeling overwhelmed lately and had taken a break from everything, including responding to our parents. She said she'd only recently started checking her messages and was shocked to see how much drama they'd caused. "I never asked them to talk to you," she said. "I didn't even know they were doing this." I was skeptical at first, but Rachel seemed sincere. She explained that while she had been laid off, it wasn't the disaster our parents had made it out to be. She'd received a severance package and had several job offers lined up but had chosen to take some time off to figure out her next steps. She admitted she was upset about losing her job but clarified that she wasn't desperate or struggling. "They made it sound like I was begging for help," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "I'm not. I've never been." Rachel went on to explain that when she confronted our parents about their behavior, they denied everything and claimed they were just trying to help her out. But Rachel didn't believe them, which is why she decided to call me directly. "I'm sorry for everything they've put you through," she said. "And I'm sorry for the way I treated you in the past. I know I wasn't fair to you, and I can't blame you for not wanting to help me now. I just wanted you to know that I never asked for any of this." Her apology took me by surprise. For as long as I could remember, Rachel had been my parents' golden child, always siding with them and looking down on me. Hearing her admit that she'd been wrong was something I never thought would happen. We ended up talking for over an hour. Rachel vented about the pressure our parents had put on her growing up, how their constant need for perfection had made her feel trapped. She said she'd spent most of her life trying to live up to their expectations, only to realize that it wasn't worth it. For the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same page. We weren't best friends by the end of the conversation, but there was a sense of understanding between us that hadn't existed before. Before we hung up, Rachel told me she planned to confront our parents again. She said she was tired of their manipulative behavior and wanted to set boundaries. I wished her luck, knowing how difficult that conversation would be. A few days after my conversation with Rachel, she followed through on her plan to confront our parents. As expected, it didn't go well. Rachel called me afterward to vent, and the details of their argument only solidified everything I already knew about my parents. She started by telling them how upset she was that they had interfered in her life without her knowledge or consent. "I didn't need your help, and I didn't ask for it," she told them. But instead of apologizing, my parents got defensive. They claimed they'd only reached out to me because they were trying to do what was best for her. Rachel wasn't having it. "What's best for me?" she asked them. "Or what's best for you? Because it sounds like you were more worried about saving face than actually helping me." She went on to accuse them of using her job loss as an excuse to meddle and said their actions had only made things worse. "You made me look desperate," she told them. "You made it seem like I was incapable of handling my own life. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" At that point, my parents began listing all the things they'd done for her over the years. They brought up how they'd paid for her education, supported her career, and always been there for her. According to Rachel, they even used the same argument they'd thrown at me: "We sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay us?" But Rachel didn't back down. She told them outright that being parents wasn't a sacrifice they could hold over her head and that she was tired of them using their so-called sacrifices as a way to manipulate her. From there, the conversation spiraled into a full-blown argument. Rachel told them she wanted to take a break from speaking to them until they could acknowledge the harm they'd caused, both to her and to me. My parents, predictably, blamed me for turning her against them. They kept saying you put these ideas in my head, Rachel told me later. Like I couldn't have come to these conclusions on my own. It's like they don't even see me as a person, they just see me as an extension of themselves. By the time Rachel hung up on them, she was shaking with anger. I don't know why I thought I could get through to them, she said. They're never going to change. After that, Rachel and I started talking more frequently. It wasn't an overnight transformation, we had years of resentment and misunderstanding to work through, but we were finally on the same page for the first time in our lives. Rachel admitted she hadn't realized just how much our parents' favoritism had hurt me until she started reflecting on her own relationship with them. She apologized again for her role in the past, and I could tell she meant it. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down on their narrative that I was the villain. They made another post on social media, this time accusing me of poisoning Rachel's mind and tearing the family apart. Thankfully, most of our relatives had already seen through their antics and called them out again. One of my aunts even commented, "Maybe if you treated both your kids with equal respect, you wouldn't be in this situation now." Others chimed in, pointing out that my parents had driven both of their children away with their controlling behavior. The post didn't stay up long, my parents deleted it after realizing it wasn't getting the reaction they wanted. From what I've heard, they've since blocked most of the family on social media. It seems like they've decided to isolate themselves rather than face the truth about their behavior. As for me, I've finally made peace with the situation. I've come to terms with the fact that my parents will never change, and I've stopped feeling guilty about cutting them out of my life. They made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences. Rachel and I are still working on rebuilding our relationship, but I'm hopeful about where we're headed. She's been more open and honest with me in the past few weeks than she ever was before, and I think losing her job has humbled her in a way that allowed her to see things from my perspective. In the meantime, my focus is on my wife and our growing family. Sophie and I recently hosted a small pregnancy announcement party with close friends and supportive relatives, and it was everything we hoped it would be. Seeing the excitement on everyone's faces reminded me of what really matters, the people who genuinely care about us. A few days ago, Rachel stopped by for lunch. She surprised me with a thoughtful gift, a custom-made onesie for the baby, complete with the logo of my business. It seemed fitting, she said with a small smile. I figured your kid should grow up knowing what you built. It was such a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. For the first time, I felt like Rachel truly understood and respected what I'd accomplished. As I sit here writing this, I can't help but feel grateful for how far I've come. My journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who love and support me. My parents may never be part of that life, but I've made peace with that. Family isn't about blood, it's about the people who stand by you, who lift you up when you're down, and who celebrate your successes without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of family I'm building, and I couldn't be happier. Here's to new beginnings, and to finally letting go of the past. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.